All right, y'all. So this here floated across my Twitter/X timeline. It's a Palestinian speech at the UN Security Council. Um, yeah, this speaks for itself. I don't need to do much commentary here, but let's listen to what they have to say in the midst of Gaza effectively being wiped off the map and Palestinians being slaughtered in astronomical numbers.
Israel has reacted with disregard and disdain. Why are they getting away with murder at this unprecedented scale? Because they were never held accountable. That is why they confess to their crimes. That is why they steal our lives, our land, our resources, our money, our past, our present, and our future in broad daylight. Mr. President, one day the massacres will stop. But how will we get over it? How will we get over the mass graves, the inability to bury our loved ones, to offer them a dignified burial, seeing them in plastic bags? How will we get over 1,000 Palestinian children amputated without anesthesia? Can you hear their screams? Can you feel their pain? Can you imagine if they were your own children? How can we get over 8,000 Palestinians under the rubble? Those who were blessed to die quickly, and those who endured a terrible and terrifying death, a slow death under the rubble while we were unable to save them. How do you get over a genocide? We will be asked, nevertheless, despite all that we are enduring and all that we have endured for 75 years, to move on, to count our dead one more time, to count our wounded, our permanently disabled, the people scarred for life, the millions of victims, and move on. We will be asked to be peaceful. We will be asked to be grateful that this horrible chapter among so many other chapters, even though this one is the worst one we have gone through, is over until the next one begins. This is the ultimate expression of double standards. The other side is never asked to move on if Israelis are killed, never asked to be peaceful in such situations. This is the ultimate expression of racism, of dehumanization of our nation. We shall all be subject to the same rules, to the same expectations. We should all have our humanity recognized and respected. Those who have dared till now to find a way or another to justify what is happening in the Gaza Strip will have to endure shame forever. For those calling on our people not to seek vengeance, not to resort to violence, they must support our efforts to deliver justice. That is the path we have chosen, justice, not vengeance. But till now, that path has been obstructed in the face of the Palestinian people, and no one has ever been held accountable for the crimes committed against them. Israeli impunity cannot be allowed to survive this assault. So finally, Palestinian survivors can live with the sense that the massacres will not resume. The horrors this impunity has led to will continue occurring until this is brought to an end. Mr. President, the world is discovering the true Gaza while Israel is destroying it. They discover as Israel destroys our university and schools that we have one of the highest literacy rates in the world. They discover as Israel destroys our historic mosques and churches that we have religious diversity and a Christian community in Gaza that is an integral part of our history, our present, and our future.
The Israeli ambassador is on his phone while this speech is going on.
The world discovers the name of brave Palestinian journalists and doctors as they learn they were killed. They discover about a young Palestinian generation that was able to be creative and to perform and to try to lead a life in impossible circumstances, only to face death once again. The world discovers human beings who, despite repeated assaults and a decade and a half of blockade, somehow preserved hope, cultivated it, built their homes to see them destroyed, built them once more, saw them destroyed once more, built them again, built their lives despite loss and suffering. From within the ruins, they were able to rise again, only to face death once again. They found a way back to life, only to see death and destruction haunting them once more. Until when? That is what Israel is attacking. Hope. That is its greatest enemy. The fact the Palestinian people have not relinquished hope. The ability of our people to resurrect. They want to make sure that Palestinians in Gaza have no homes to return to. They want to make sure they have no life to return to. They want to make sure that life in Gaza is no longer possible. With one aim, what they call voluntary migration. Voluntary. 21,000 people killed, half of them almost children. And by the way, we mentioned the children and the women. Many innocent men have been killed. Voluntary migration, the code name for forced displacement. These are the options for Palestinians: destruction or displacement, death or displacement.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, look, not trying to be melodramatic or anything, but we are currently witnessing history, and not the good kind. You know, we're currently witnessing history. You have Gaza effectively being wiped off the map. Northern Gaza barely exists anymore. You know, the overwhelming majority of the buildings there and the structures there have been obliterated. You already see a situation where the IDF is driving through North Gaza in their tanks, and you see an Israeli flag every 20 or 30 feet. You see these Israeli real estate companies already running with ads about like beachfront property in Gaza that you'll be able to get soon. You got a lot of media figures and a lot of politicians are playing professionally stupid watching what's unfolding now. You know, this idea in the U.S. that like, oh, we'll have the Palestinian Authority take over Gaza and we'll get a two-state solution. This is like the pipe dream that they hang on to, that they don't actually care about at all, when we're currently witnessing very clearly, very directly in front of our eyes, the ethnic cleansing of Gaza and the attempt to resettle it, Israelis to resettle it. That's what we're watching. And everybody in the world seems to get that. Israeli officials seem to come out and say that, or say very similar things, genocidal things, on a regular basis. But again, there's this move, particularly from the U.S., where all the power is to just ignore it, act like it's not happening. And look, you also can't have this conversation without bringing out this obvious point that we wouldn't be at this point if not for the victim narrative of Israel that they invoke in a disingenuous way to allow themselves to get away with all sorts of crimes. And historically, man, this is what happens. You have the worst atrocities are always committed in the name of we are oppressed, we are victims, everything's unfair to us. And so that's why we have to lash out. We've been given no choice but to be violent and be aggressive. And look, I'm not trying to downplay the history here. Obviously, throughout history, Jews have been victims. There were the pogroms in Europe, and then of course you had the Holocaust from Nazi Germany, and without a doubt, they're a massively victimized people. But now, in the name of that victimhood, they have a state which is like a world-sanctioned ethno-state and theocracy, which is already an issue in and of itself, but we don't need to dive further into that. And then, while invoking their continued oppressed victim status, they oppress and victimize a massive group of people, the Palestinians, both in the West Bank with the illegal settlements and in Gaza with the total blockade, total embargo, and yes, it's fair to call it an occupation, even though Israeli apologists like to pretend like, oh, we stopped that in 2005. Nonsense. That's such a Weasley argument, because effectively, if you control the borders, the food, the fuel, the water, and you're doing a total embargo and blockade, you are occupying them. It's just a different kind of occupation, right? So you can't hide behind historical narratives and atrocities to then greenlight your own current day atrocity. But that's what we're witnessing. That's what we're witnessing. And look, every year at the UN, there's this talking point that Israel gives out. It's like, well, look, we offered the Palestinians peace a number of times, and they said no every single time. And so they're trying to portray themselves as utterly reasonable and pro-peace, and the Palestinians as uniquely vicious and warlike and have a unique hatred for Jews because they're Jews. This is like the narrative they try to get across. But every year the UN votes on a two-state solution for Israel along the 1967 borders, for Israel and Palestine. And it's blocked by the US and Israel. And Palestine supports it. So there's been hundreds of attempts for a peaceful resolution through the UN, and the US and Israel block it. And then they have the nerve to turn around and say, well, they're the ones who walked away from peace, and they walked away from it in the direct negotiations, you know, in 2000, 2001, and late 1960s, et cetera, et cetera. They have their talking points that they go to, but they conveniently leave out that the UN has tried to address this. By the way, that's the way Israel was created too, through the UN. So there's tried to be a creation of a Palestine through the UN along the 1967 borders, and it's Israel and the US that block it every single time. So peaceful diplomatic means are blocked. Guess what? In 2018 in Gaza, there was the Great March of Return. It was peaceful, nonviolent resistance. in the same vein as the civil rights movement in the U.S. And what happened? The IDF gunned down innocent Palestinians. They murdered a number of people, including journalists. They would shoot off the limbs of Palestinians on purpose. So you have a higher number of amputees in Gaza than almost anywhere else in the world. So they tried the peaceful way too, and that didn't work. So diplomatic didn't work. Peaceful didn't work. Violent didn't work. What's left? Well, Israel's the one that's answering the question, and they're saying what's left is voluntary relocation, aka ethnic cleansing and genocide. And that's what we're witnessing. And there will come a time when everybody looks back on this and they go, Jesus Christ, how did they let that happen back then? How did they let that happen? That could never happen now. We're more evolved. We're more enlightened. Well, guess what? We were all saying that right before this atrocity, right? Hey, the world has evolved. We now have the Geneva Conventions and the Nuremberg Tribunal and international law, and there's war crimes, and, you know, we uphold it through the UN, and there's this framework, this liberal, rules-based international order. What we're learning now is that's all fake. And nobody knows that better than Palestine. The closer you are to power centers, the more you're an ally with the world's sole superpower and biggest military, the more you get away with whatever the hell you want to get away with. And that's what we're witnessing. And it's one of the grossest things I've ever seen. And again, we're living through history and not in a positive sense. And I'll end on this. Thankfully, most people and most nations will be able to say very clearly, we were on the right side of this. But the U.S. and Israel in particular will not be able to say that. They're the ones who are steering the ship. They're the ones who are greenlighting atrocity after atrocity. And they're the ones who will also try to obfuscate what's currently happening day in and day out to make you feel like you're crazy when you object to pulling out dead kids from underneath rubble who were bombed relentlessly. Don't let them gaslight you. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.